Alright, now let's hide our reference layer by clicking on the eyeball. And you can see we have a sketch here. Now we can further refine this. If we don't like the way it looks, we can change it a little bit. Might polish it up a little bit around here, because you want it to look good by eye, and that even goes for reference photos. Like, you don't always have to copy your model, even if you do it from a photograph. You can always make changes just to make things more balanced. So now at this point, I don't really use this reference. I mean, I could go by the lighting that's on it right now, but I usually want to do my own lighting based on the composition that I'm painting this into. So at this point, this reference can just get deleted. And you're going to see that, yeah, we traced this, but that's not going to help us much if we can't figure out how to shade this and figure out how to fit it into an environment. See down here, the arms don't look that good to me. I'm going to go ahead and fix those a little bit too before we move forward. It looks better to me. I'll widen the arm a little bit there. When you're tracing, sometimes you don't always get a perfect trace. You gotta fix it up a little bit. So we have our guide now. Let's go ahead and fill our canvas with a gray color. Let's fill it with a number 4 value. We'll choose fill, click on OK. We'll go ahead and create a new layer. And let's call this dark, and we'll go ahead and make it a multiply composite method. We'll choose a number 6 value. We can go ahead and start shading this now, however we like. Now at this point, I'm not looking at that model or that reference. I'm just going to shade this based on instinct. And there is kind of a logic to things when you're shading. You want to think about where your light's coming from. So let's say our light is coming from the top left over here. We can even draw it in with a little image there. So that's our light. And we want our shadows to be on the opposite side from our light. So that's what I'm doing on this dark layer here. I'm filling in these shadows appropriately. You want to think of all of these forms as being different three-dimensional objects that are all kind of merged together. And if it helps, go ahead and use Poser to study those 3D models and move the light around and see how it interacts with those 3D shapes. That'll give you a really good idea of how to shade things. It's all about observation. Really good artists don't just know things. They took the time to make the observation. And that goes beyond just looking at something and thinking that you understand it. You have to really, really comprehend it until you do understand it and go, okay, I really start to see when I look at people, this certain contour around their eyes. You know, there's this roundness where their eyeballs kind of bulge out under their eyelids there. You know, things like that keep your eyes from looking flat when you're drawing eyes. There's shadows from the eyelid on the eyes. The eyes are reflective. You know, you have to know all these things, and it takes a lot of drawing people to get to a point to where you're comfortable making these decisions on your own. Until then, you can just use your reference model or reference photo. There's nothing wrong with that. That's what a lot of the old masters did. They would have people sit for them. They didn't have cameras, but they certainly used models of people to do their realistic illustrations. You can't expect that all of the best realistic portraits and scenes with a lot of people in them were all drawn from imagination. They had people come out and pose for that stuff. So, you know, you might not have that luxury. This model here is just as good. So go ahead and add a shadow now. Light's coming from top left, so shadow from our head's going to be cast facing away from that. And we'll zoom out. Start putting in some broader shading now. The arms are cylinders. Shade them appropriately. The torso is kind of a cylinder. The breasts are spheres. Alright, so I've finished adding in my shading. I used a few different levels of dark gray here to give it some depth. I'm going to create a new layer and call it light. We want to make sure the gray that we use is lighter than our background, so let's choose a 3, and we'll use the airbrush to go ahead and paint in some lighter gray on our highlight side. On the nose, that's usually one of the brightest parts of the body. So are the lips. Don't worry about this being a little sloppy because we can blend this too later. So I'm just going to go in and continue adding in these light grays. Alright, so I've finished adding in all of my light colors. And now I'm going to create another new layer. Let's call this highlight. This is going to be just a few spots where we use absolute white. Those are going to be put in with the scratchboard tool so they're nice and sharp. Very small brush to put in some reflective spots on the eyes. Do that on the lip as well, and on the tip of the nose. Let's go ahead and put in a basic background. Let's go to the canvas layer, and we'll go ahead and go to the number 7 gray value. We'll go to fill, click on OK. It's going to look a little strange, but we can fix this. We will create a new layer. Let's call it mid. We'll select a number 4 gray value and just use the airbrush to go ahead and fill in the center here. As much as you like. You could keep a little bit of that shadow if you like it. Go back to our light layer, and we'll just use the eraser to clean up some of this area that we overpainted. Go to the mid layer. If you see anywhere you overpainted there, go ahead and fix that. So I pays to be a little careful when you're painting. There's a little bit there on the arm too that we need to shave off. If there's anything on your dark layer that you overpainted, clean that up as well. So I think that looks pretty good. We do want it to look a little sloppy so it looks like a painting. Let's go back to the canvas layer, zoom out. Let's further establish our lighting. So we have our little dot here that's going to be our light. So let's use that white color with a big airbrush to give a more realistic sense of lighting. We'll use black outside the edge there. So we want a nice transition like this. Add a little more white so we give this more of a halo with a smaller brush. So that's looking a little more realistic now. Let's add more dark in the corner here too, like there's a shadow being cast from the body. And a vignette to draw the focus in towards the subject. So it's up to you if you want to keep adding layers. At some point I get kind of fed up with having so many layers to deal with and having to switch back and forth, so I like to just do a drop all. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of blending with the diffuse blur blender. Be careful not to destroy all of your nice fine detail. You just want to blend out some of these transitional areas here, just to smooth the color out. Alright, so blending really helps. If you overblend and you want to sharpen some things, you can use the pinch brush. Let's do that on the shoulder here. I'm going to paint with the brush along the edge to smooth it out and sharpen it. You can do that anywhere you want, really. You don't want this to be too sharp though. So you want it to look like a painting still. But this adds a little bit of sharpness and balances out the contrast. It smooths out some of the lines and contours. Just be careful where you use it. because it can pull things that you don't intend to pull. So use a smaller brush where you need to get in tight. Use a large brush where you have a lot of room to just paint and you don't have to worry about other things getting in your way. Like here, for instance, this is a very tricky area. If I start painting here, I start to pull in some of the arm and I start to pull in some of the rib cage. So that's an area where I want to use a smaller brush and stay focused on particular areas. There's some places here you'll just have to clean up manually. So you can use the airbrush, hold Alt to sample that dark color, just manually correct that by painting in however it's supposed to be painted.